5 years ago, my fiancé left me for my best friend the night before our wedding. At our 10-year college reunion, he laughed right in my face and said leaving me was the best decision he ever made. 5 minutes later, a man everyone in the room recognized walked through the grand double doors holding a 3-year-old boy. My former best friend dropped her wine glass and it shattered across the marble floor. My name is Camille, and I am 33 years old. I spent the last half-decade building an empire in silence after the two people I trusted most destroyed my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who severely underestimated your worth and your power. The grand ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago was buzzing with the loud, forced energy of a 10-year university alumni gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of people I had not seen since we were all wide-eyed students convinced we were going to conquer the world. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated through the sea of designer dresses and tailored suits, carrying silver trays of champagne and bite-sized appetizers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. I stood near a massive floral arrangement of white roses, holding a simple glass of sparkling water and watching the crowd. I wore a tailored black dress that was entirely custom-made but deliberately understated. I did not come here tonight to show off. I came here to observe. For the first 45 minutes, I managed to blend into the background. I spoke politely with former classmates about their expanding families and their corporate promotions. I smiled at the right times and kept my answers about my own life intentionally vague. I told them I worked in investments, which was technically true, but revealed nothing of the actual scale. I was enjoying the quiet anonymity until a familiar grating voice sliced through the sophisticated jazz music playing in the background. Well, look who finally decided to show her face in public. I turned slowly and braced myself. Standing less than 3 feet away was Braden. He was 35 now, and he looked exactly the same as the night he walked out on me. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that screamed desperation, and his hair was slicked back with too much product. Clinging tightly to his left arm was Rachel. She was 33 just like me, but she was trying very hard to look 25. Her dress was a blinding sequence of gold sequins that caught every light in the room, and her lips were painted a bright artificial red. A small crowd of our old college friends immediately formed a circle around us. They smelled the drama unfolding, and like sharks sensing blood in the water, they closed in to watch the spectacle. "Hello, Braden," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "Hello, Rachel." Rachel offered a pout that was meant to convey deep sympathy, but her eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. "Oh, Camille, honey," she said, stepping forward and invading my personal space. "We honestly did not think you would have the courage to come tonight. Not after everything that happened. I mean, it has been 5 years and you still look so plain. Are you doing okay? You can be honest with us. We are all friends here." I took a slow sip of my water. "I am doing exceptionally well, Rachel. Thank you for your concern." Braden let out a sharp barking laugh that echoed over the music. "Exceptionally well," he repeated loudly, making sure the surrounding circle of alumni could hear every single word. "Look at you, Camille. You are wearing an off-the-rack black dress that looks like it belongs at a funeral. You are standing in the corner alone. You always were the safe, boring choice." He took a step closer, towering over me in a weak attempt at physical intimidation. I used to feel guilty about what happened between Rachel and me. But looking at you now, and looking at the incredible woman standing next to me, I realized something. Leaving you the night before our wedding was the absolute best decision I ever made. It freed me from a life of mediocrity. The alumni surrounding us exchanged wide-eyed glances. A few people shifted uncomfortably on their feet, but no one stepped in to defend me. They were too captivated by the cruel theater Braden was putting on. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply looked at the man I had once planned to spend my life with and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a clinical observation of a very small man trying to make himself feel big. "I am glad you feel that way, Braden," I said smoothly. "It sounds like you two truly deserve each other." Rachel, clearly annoyed that I was not breaking down in tears, decided to escalate the attack. She raised her left hand and dramatically brushed a piece of imaginary lint from Braden's lapel. The movement was calculated to display her engagement ring. It was a massive 5-carat diamond that caught the chandelier light and practically blinded the people standing closest to us. Braden spares no expense for the people he truly values. Rachel boasted, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. He knows I deserve the best. We have been living an absolute dream, Camille. Braden has been building his tech startup from the ground up, and he is doing incredible things. He is a visionary, and I have been right by his side supporting him while building my own empire. We are a power couple. You would not understand that kind of ambition. You always just wanted to settle down in some quiet suburb and clip coupons. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a theatrical whisper that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. Honestly, Camille, I feel sorry for you. I really do. It must be so difficult to come to an event like this and see all of us thriving while you are still exactly where we left you. I looked at the 5-carat diamond on her finger. I knew exactly how Braden financed that ring, but I kept that information tucked away for now. I looked at Rachel Gold's sequin dress and Braden desperate velvet jacket. They were projecting an image of massive wealth and success, but it was all a flimsy paper-thin facade. You certainly have a vivid imagination, Rachel, I replied. I suppose that helps in your line of work. Rachel stiffened, her fake smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. My line of work requires brilliance and strategy, she snapped, not imagination. Braden put his arm around Rachel's waist, pulling her close in a show of unified dominance. You have no idea who you are talking to, Camille. Rachel is at the top of her game. We both are. In fact, we are standing on the edge of the biggest financial victory of our lives. The circle of alumni leaned in closer, their curiosity piqued. This was the moment Rachel and Braden had been building toward. They had cornered me not just to mock my appearance or rub their relationship in my face. They had cornered me because they needed an audience for their grand announcement. They needed to crush me publicly to validate their own fragile egos. Rachel stood up taller, puffing out her chest. She looked around the circle, making sure everyone was paying absolute attention to her. The string quartet in the corner of the ballroom transitioned to a lively classical piece, adding a cinematic quality to the tension radiating between us. Since you are so far out of the loop, Camille, let me enlighten you, Rachel proclaimed loudly. I am preparing to announce some shocking career news tonight. News that will completely cement our status at the absolute top of the corporate food chain. News that will prove once and for all why Braden chose a winner over a loser. I held her gaze, my expression completely blank. I took another slow, calculated sip of my sparkling water, waiting for the trap to spring. I knew exactly what she was going to say. I knew every detail of the lie she was about to spin, and I knew exactly how I was going to tear it all down. I watched the eager faces of our former classmates. I saw Mark from my old biology class holding his breath. I saw David, the former student body president, adjusting his tie as he waited for Rachel to drop her bombshell. The collective anticipation in the room was palpable. They all expected me to crumble. They expected me to run crying toward the coat check, hiding my face in shame, just like the old Camille would have done 5 years ago. But the old Camille died the night she found her fiancé and her best friend tangled together in her own apartment. The old Camille died when she discovered her joint wedding savings account had been completely drained, leaving her to pay the cancellation fees for a wedding that would never happen. The woman standing before them now was forged in the fire of that ultimate betrayal. I had spent thousands of hours analyzing data, making ruthless investments, and building a holding company that controlled the very industries Braden was desperately trying to break into. I did not need to raise my voice to assert my dominance. My silence was a weapon, and I wielded it with precision. Go ahead, Rachel, I prompted softly, offering her a gentle, encouraging smile that completely unsettled her. Do not keep everyone in suspense. We are all dying to hear your incredible news. Please enlighten us about this massive victory. Tell us exactly how powerful you have become. Braden puffed out his chest, looking like a peacock ready to boast. He nodded at Rachel, giving her the silent permission to unleash their master stroke. Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with malicious triumph as she prepared to deliver the words she believed would finally crush my spirit forever. The crystal chandeliers above us seemed to shine a little brighter, casting fragmented prisms of light across the expensive marble flooring. The scent of roasted duck and rich red wine drifted over from the catering tables, reminding me of the lavish dinners I now hosted in my own penthouse. The contrast between my actual life and the pathetic existence they assumed I was living was almost comical. I noticed the slight tremor in Braden's left hand as he held his scotch glass. It was a tiny tell, a nervous tick he only displayed when he was deeply anxious about money. It was the same tick he had when we were 25 and he could not afford his portion of our shared rent. Despite the velvet jacket and the boastful words, he was sweating. The bravado was a thin shield covering a mountain of corporate debt and impending legal disaster. Rachel, on the other hand, was completely oblivious to her own impending doom. She genuinely believed her own lies. She believed the gold sequins and the 5-carat diamond made her untouchable. She believed that because she had stolen my fiancé, she had somehow stolen my future. She had no idea that her actions had merely removed a toxic anchor from my life, allowing me to soar higher than she could ever comprehend. The string quartet hit a sharp crescendo, perfectly scoring the moment. The alumni in our circle leaned forward, hanging on Rachel every movement. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression serene. I was the calm eye of the storm they were trying to create. I waited as Rachel opened her bright red lips, preparing to announce the shocking career news that she believed would destroy me once and for all. She took one final deep breath. "I am officially the new vice president of public relations at Axiom Holdings," Rachel announced. Her voice echoed across our small circle, carrying a sharp pitch designed to command absolute attention. Axiom Holdings was not just a company, it was a global titan. A corporate monolith that acquired tech firms, real estate, and media conglomerates with ruthless efficiency. For someone our age to secure a vice president title at Axiom meant they were a verified industry shark. The crowd around us literally gasped. Mark almost dropped his champagne glass. David let out a low whistle of pure admiration. Rachel soaked up their awe like a dying plant absorbing rain. She tossed her hair over her shoulder, her gold sequins catching the light. "It is a massive role," she continued, ensuring she made eye contact with every single person except me. "I report directly to the executive board. I oversee international campaigns, crisis management, and corporate acquisitions." They basically handed me a blank check and a corner office on the top floor of the downtown tower. The benefits are outrageous, but of course they demand the absolute best. Braden puffed out his chest, looking at Rachel with a manufactured expression of pride. "That is not even the best part," he said. His voice boomed over the soft jazz music, demanding the spotlight back. "Rachel is brilliant, yes, but her position at Axiom perfectly aligned with my own ventures. You see, my tech startup has been making serious waves in the venture capital sector. We developed a proprietary algorithm that completely disrupts market analytics." He paused for dramatic effect, surveying the captivated alumni. "Axiom Holdings recognized my vision. They are officially acquiring my company. We sign the final paperwork next week. The buyout is valued at $50 million. The circle erupted. People were clapping. Someone patted Braden on the back. A woman I barely remembered from sophomore year squealed and hugged Rachel. $50 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. To a group of 30-somethings still climbing the corporate ladder, Braden and Rachel had just ascended to the realm of gods. They were young, wealthy, and powerful. They were the ultimate power couple of our graduating class. Then, like a synchronized routine, the crowd turned their eyes toward me. The awe shifted instantly into suffocating pity. I could see the exact thoughts processing behind their polite smiles. Poor Camille. She lost a $50 million lottery ticket. She got dumped for a future Axiom executive. She is standing here in a plain black dress while her ex-fiancé is about to become a tech tycoon. Rachel turned to me, her red lips curved into a patronizing smile. She reached out and lightly touched my arm. I did not flinch away. I just stared at her manicured fingers resting against my sleeve. I know this must be incredibly hard for you to hear, Camille, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Seeing us succeed at this level while you are still trying to figure things out. But I want you to know I hold no grudges. In fact, since I'm building my new department at Axiom, I am actually looking for an administrative assistant. It involves a lot of coffee runs and scheduling, but the health insurance is decent. If you need a job, you can send me your resume. I could probably pull some strings and get you an interview. Braden chuckled, shaking his head. Come on, Rachel, do not overwhelm her. Camille was never cut out for the corporate fast lane. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with absolute disdain. I am doing you a favor, Camille. If we had gotten married, you would have held me back. You wanted a simple life. You wanted to save pennies and clip coupons and worry about electric bills. I needed a partner who could run an empire with me. Rachel is a shark. You were just a goldfish. It is nothing personal. It is just business. You should be thanking me for cutting you loose before we made a huge mistake. The sheer audacity of his speech left the surrounding alumni in a state of stunned silence. A few people looked down at their shoes, unable to meet my gaze. They were waiting for me to break. They expected tears. They expected me to turn around and run out of the grand ballroom humiliated and defeated. I took a slow breath, letting the rich scent of the roasted duck and expensive perfume wash over me. I looked at Braden. I looked at his velvet tuxedo jacket. I looked at the way his jaw clenched slightly, a nervous habit he could never quite shake. Then I looked at Rachel. I looked at the heavy 5-carat diamond resting on her finger. I knew that stone was flawless. I also knew it was heavily financed. I remained perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single emotion bleed into my expression. I simply smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a cold, calculated curving of the lips that instantly unsettled both of them. You two have painted quite a magnificent picture, I said, my voice slicing through the ambient noise of the ballroom with absolute clarity. A $50 million buyout, a vice president title at Axiom Holdings, a massive diamond ring. It sounds like a modern fairy tale. Braden crossed his arms, trying to maintain his posture of dominance. It is not a fairy tale, Camille. It is reality. You just refuse to accept it because you are stuck in the past. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. The crowd held its collective breath. I am not stuck in the past, Braden, I said smoothly. But since you brought it up, I think we should ensure everyone here has the full context of how this power couple was forged. Rachel dropped her hand from my arm, her fake smile faltering. Camille, do not do this. Do not embarrass yourself. I ignored her entirely, addressing the circle of eager listeners. You see, everyone, Braden and Rachel did not just fall in love over corporate strategy. Their origin story is far more intimate. I locked eyes with Rachel. Tell them, Rachel. Tell them how you secured your visionary tech genius. Tell them about the night before my wedding. Rachel opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She glanced at Braden, panic flaring in her eyes. I did not give them a chance to recover. It was a Friday night. I continued my tone, conversational, yet razor sharp. Our wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The caterers were paid. The venue was booked. The flowers were already sitting in the refrigerators. I came back to our shared apartment early because my mother was feeling unwell. I walked through the front door and heard noises coming from my own bedroom. Braden's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I raised my hand, silencing him with a single commanding gesture. I opened the door to my bedroom, I said, projecting my voice so the alumni standing on the outer edges of our circle could hear every word clearly. And I found my fiancé and my maid of honor tangled together in my sheets. They had not even bothered to lock the front door. The crowd gasped. Someone muttered a shocked profanity. Mark and David exchanged wide-eyed looks of pure horror. The narrative of the brilliant power couple was instantly shattered, replaced by the gritty, disgusting reality of their betrayal. But that is not even the best part. I continued, pacing my words perfectly. Passion is a powerful thing, I suppose. People make mistakes. But this was not just a mistake of passion. This was a calculated financial extraction. You see, Braden and I had a joint savings account for our wedding and our future home. We had saved for 3 years. I checked my phone as I stood in the doorway, watching them scramble for their clothes. I had received an alert from the bank. Braden had drained the entire account 30 minutes before I walked in. He transferred $40,000 of our joint savings into a private offshore account. Rachel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You are lying. You are a bitter liar." I smiled coldly at her. "Am I lying, Rachel? Shall I pull up the police report I filed the next morning? Or the civil suit documents that Braden settled out of court to keep his name clean? He took my money to fund the very prototype he is now claiming is worth $50 million. And he slept with my best friend in my bed the night before our wedding to celebrate his theft." The grand ballroom felt eerily quiet despite the hundreds of people mingling around us. Our specific circle was entirely frozen. No one was looking at Braden and Rachel with awe anymore. They were looking at them with absolute disgust. The glamorous facade had been ripped away, exposing the rotting foundation underneath. "You have no right to bring this up," Braden hissed, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. "That was 5 years ago. You are obsessed with me. You cannot stand the fact that I moved on to someone better, someone who actually has a career, someone who works at Axiom. Axiom Holdings." I repeated, letting the name roll off my tongue. "It is a fascinating company, truly visionary. They only hire the absolute best. They do not tolerate fraud. They do not tolerate embezzlement. And they certainly do not tolerate people who lie about their credentials." Rachel stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "Are you threatening me, Camille? Because I could have you removed from this hotel right now. My security clearance at Axiom gives me privileges you cannot even fathom. I'm a vice president. I can destroy you with a single phone call." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a sound of pure amusement that seemed to unnerve her more than my accusations. "You cannot destroy anyone, Rachel," I said gently. "You do not have security clearance. You do not have a corner office. And you certainly do not have the power to remove me from this building." The sheer confidence in my voice made Braden hesitate. He looked at Rachel, then back at me. A shadow of doubt crossed his face. He knew I was not prone to dramatic bluffs. He knew that when I spoke, I always had the data to back it up. "You are bluffing," Braden said, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "You are just a sad, lonely woman trying to ruin our night. We are done here. Come on, Rachel. We have actual important people to network with." He grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her toward the center of the ballroom. But the crowd of alumni did not part for them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a solid wall of judgment. Mark crossed his arms, staring Braden down. David shook his head in disgust. The power couple was suddenly trapped in a cage of their own making. I did not move. I watched them struggle against the wall of former classmates. I watched the panic set in as they realized their social capital had been completely eradicated in less than 3 minutes. They had tried to humiliate me, and instead they had exposed their own monstrous nature to everyone they cared about impressing. Rachel yanked her arm free from Braden's grip. "Move," she snapped at a woman blocking her path. "I am a vice president at Axiom. You cannot treat me like this. I will ruin your career." The woman simply stared at her, unimpressed by the desperate threat. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Every person in our circle was waiting for the next strike. They wanted to see how far I would push this. They wanted to see if the glorious power couple would completely self-destruct right here on the marble floor. But I did not need to push any further. I had already set the stage perfectly. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. I checked the sleek silver watch on my wrist. The timing was impeccable. The grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. A cool breeze swept through the heated room, carrying the faint scent of rain and city asphalt. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped through the threshold. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that moved with effortless grace. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that commanded the room. They were a piercing, intelligent gray that seemed to absorb every detail in a fraction of a second. Resting comfortably against his hip, holding a small stuffed dinosaur, was a 3-year-old boy with a mop of curly brown hair. The room went completely silent. The jazz music seemed to fade away. Every head turned toward the doors. Harrison Caldwell had arrived. The untouchable billionaire CEO of Axiom Holdings, the very man Braden and Rachel had just been bragging about, was standing in our alumni gala. Rachel froze. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her pale and terrified. Her hand trembled violently, and the crystal wineglass slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The silence in our circle was thick and suffocating. Mark and David exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the other alumni stared at me with unvarnished pity. They had just listened to Rachel boast about her fabricated vice president title at Axiom Holdings, and they had heard Braden brag about his impending $50 million buyout. In their eyes, I was the tragic casualty of this glamorous power couple. I was the woman left behind, the discarded fiancé, who was supposed to run away in tears. I did not run. I stood my ground on the polished marble floor, holding my glass of sparkling water with absolute steadiness. I looked at the heavy 5-carat diamond resting on Rachel's finger and then shifted my gaze to Braden velvet tuxedo jacket. They were projecting an image of untouchable wealth, but I knew the exact foundation of lies their empire was built upon. I let a slow, cold smile curve my lips. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, and it instantly unsettled them. Rachel shifted her weight, her fake expression of sympathy faltering. Braden clenched his jaw, clearly unnerved by my lack of emotional breakdown. He had expected me to shatter, but I was standing before him like a monolith. "You two have painted quite a magnificent picture," I said, my voice slicing through the ambient noise of the ballroom with absolute clarity. A $50 million buyout, a top-tier executive title, a massive diamond ring. It sounds like a modern fairy tale. Braden crossed his arms, trying to assert physical dominance. He stepped closer, attempting to use his height to intimidate me. "It is not a fairy tale, Camille. It is reality. You just refuse to accept it because you are stuck in the past. You need to grow up and realize that the world moves on." I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. The surrounding crowd held its collective breath. "I am not stuck in the past, Braden," I replied smoothly. "But since you brought it up, I think we should ensure everyone here has the full context of how this phenomenal power couple was actually forged." Rachel dropped her hand from Braden's arm, panic flaring in her eyes. Her perfectly painted red lips parted in sudden alarm. "Camille, do not do this. Do not embarrass yourself tonight. We are trying to be civil. We are trying to show you some grace." I ignored her entirely and addressed the circle of eager listeners. The alumni leaned in closer, their curiosity overriding their manners. "You see, everyone, Braden and Rachel, did not just fall in love over corporate strategy and mutual ambition. Their origin story is far more intimate and far more calculated than a simple boardroom romance." I locked eyes with Rachel, refusing to let her look away. The heavy scent of her expensive perfume hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the foul reality of her character. "Tell them, Rachel. Tell them how you secured your visionary tech genius. Tell them exactly where you were the night before my wedding." Rachel opened her mouth, but the words died in her throat. She glanced wildly at Braden, seeking rescue from the trap closing around them. I did not give them a single second to recover their composure. It was a Friday night. I continued pacing my words perfectly, so that every syllable hung in the air. Our wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The caterers were paid in full. The venue was booked. The floral arrangements were already sitting in the commercial refrigerators. I came back to our shared apartment early because I had a sudden severe headache. I walked through the front door expecting to find my fiancé writing his vows. Instead, I heard noises coming from my own bedroom. Braden's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of pale. "Shut up, Camille," he hissed, taking a threatening step toward me. "You have no right to bring this up here. This is a professional networking event." I raised my hand, silencing him with a single commanding gesture. I opened the door to my bedroom, I said, projecting my voice so the alumni standing on the outer edges of our circle could hear me over the string quartet playing in the background. and I found my fiancé and my maid of honor tangled together in my own sheets. They had not even bothered to lock the front door. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone at the back muttered a shocked profanity. The narrative of the brilliant, ambitious power couple was instantly shattered. It was replaced by the gritty, disgusting reality of their betrayal. Mark shook his head in sheer disbelief, while several women in the group glared at Rachel with open contempt. The admiration they had commanded just moments ago vanished completely. But that is not even the best part. I continued maintaining my icy composure. Passion is a powerful thing, I suppose. People make terrible choices in the heat of the moment. But this was not just a mistake of passion. This was a calculated financial extraction. I turned my attention fully to Braden, watching him sweat under the bright chandelier lights. You see, Braden and I had a joint savings account for our wedding and our future home. We had saved diligently for 3 years. As I stood in the doorway watching them scramble for their clothes, I checked my phone. I had received a fraud alert from the bank. Braden had drained the entire account exactly 30 minutes before I walked into the apartment. He transferred $40,000 of our joint savings into a private offshore account. Rachel gasped loudly, putting a hand over her heart in a theatrical display of shock. She looked around at the judging faces trying to salvage her ruined image. You are lying. You are a bitter, pathetic liar making up stories because you are jealous of my diamond and my career. I smiled coldly at her empty threats. Am I lying, Rachel? Shall I pull up the police report I filed the very next morning? Or perhaps I should share the civil suit documents that Braden settled out of court to keep his name out of the public record. He took my money to fund the initial prototype that he is now claiming is worth $50 million. He stole my savings to launch his company, and he slept with my best friend in my bed the night before our wedding to celebrate his theft. The grand ballroom felt eerily quiet around us. Our specific circle was entirely frozen in shock. No one was looking at Braden and Rachel with awe or admiration anymore. The glamorous facade had been ripped away, exposing the rotting, treacherous foundation underneath. The alumni stared at them with absolute disgust, realizing that the wealth and success they had just been envying were built on theft and profound betrayal. You have no right to bring this up here, Braden shouted, his voice cracking with panic and rage. The muscles in his neck strained against his collar. That was 5 years ago. You are obsessed with me. You cannot stand the fact that I moved on to someone better, someone who actually has a career, someone who is not a plain, boring failure. His words were meant to hurt, but they bounced off my armor without leaving a single scratch. I stood perfectly still, watching him unravel completely. The sophisticated tech CEO had vanished, leaving behind a desperate, cornered coward. You are pathetic, Camille Braden continued, his face flushing a deep, angry red. You always were a burden. You wanted to settle down and clip coupons while I was trying to build an empire. I took that money because I earned it. I was the one with the vision. You were just holding me back. You could not satisfy me intellectually or physically. Rachel is a shark. She knows how to navigate the real world. You are just a sad, lonely woman trying to ruin our night because nobody else wants you. The crowd murmured in deep disapproval at his vicious outburst. But Braden was too far gone to care about social decorum. He was cornered and lashing out wildly, trying to regain control of the narrative by tearing me down in front of our peers. Look at you, Braden sneered, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. You are standing here alone in a cheap dress, trying to drag us down to your miserable level. You are a bitter failure, Camille. You have nothing. No husband, no career, no future. I am about to be a multimillionaire, and you are just the pathetic joke I left behind. Let me tell you exactly what you are. He took a deep, sharp breath, puffing out his chest as he prepared to deliver his heaviest, most humiliating insult. He locked his furious, desperate eyes onto mine, winding up to verbally destroy me in front of everyone we knew. He wanted to break me to see me cry, to prove that he held the power. Before he could utter a single syllable, a heavy, resonant thud echoed across the grand ballroom. The sound was loud enough and commanding enough to instantly cut through the classical music and the low chatter of the surrounding guests. The massive mahogany double doors at the far end of the ballroom suddenly burst open. The heavy wood struck the brass doorstops with a definitive crack. A sudden rush of cool evening air swept into the overheated ballroom. It carried the distinct scent of rain and crisp autumn wind. The string quartet previously playing a lively classical piece faltered. A single misplayed note scraped across a cello string before the musicians stopped playing altogether. The ambient chatter of hundreds of alumni died out in a localized wave spreading from the entrance all the way to the center of the room where I stood. Every head turned, every eye shifted toward the doorway. Stepping through the threshold was Harrison Caldwell. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders, a testament to master tailoring that commanded authority before he even spoke a word. His dark hair was slightly windblown, giving him a rugged edge that contrasted sharply with his refined attire. His piercing gray eyes scanned the massive ballroom with the casual, calculating indifference of a man who owned the building, the land beneath it, and likely the companies of half the people standing inside it. The sheer weight of his arrival altered the atmospheric pressure in the room. This was not a man who attended college reunions. This was a man who moved markets with a single phone call, whose investments reshaped global industries, and who famously guarded his private life with ruthless efficiency. But what immediately captivated the room was not just his imposing physical presence or the raw power he radiated. It was the fact that this notoriously ruthless billionaire, the reclusive titan of the tech and investment world, was holding a sleepy 3-year-old boy resting comfortably against his hip. Leo had his arms wrapped securely around Harrison's neck, his mop of curly brown hair pressing against the lapel of the impossibly expensive suit. My son was clutching a small stuffed dinosaur in one hand, looking around the crowded room with wide, curious eyes. The silence in the ballroom was profound. It was the kind of absolute quiet that only happens when people are genuinely stunned into speechlessness. Then the whispers began. They started as a low, frantic hiss spreading through the crowd like a lit fuse. "Is that him?" someone muttered just a few feet away from me. "That is Harrison Caldwell. What is the CEO of Axiom Holdings doing at our reunion?" The name Axiom Holdings rippled through the crowd. It was the very same company Rachel had just spent the last 20 minutes bragging about. The same corporate monolith she falsely claimed to be a vice president for. The same juggernaut that Braden was desperately praying would buy out his failing fraudulent startup to save him from federal indictment. I kept my eyes fixed on Braden and Rachel. I wanted to witness the exact moment the realization hit them. Braden's arrogant sneer slowly melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated confusion. He stared at Harrison, his brain struggling to process why his ultimate corporate idol, the man he had been aggressively pursuing for a $50 million bailout, was standing in a hotel ballroom holding a toddler. Rachel, however, was undergoing a much more visceral reaction. As someone who had researched Axiom Holdings extensively to build her fake persona, she knew exactly what Harrison Caldwell looked like. She knew he was the supreme authority, the apex predator of the corporate ecosystem she was pretending to dominate. Her mouth opened slightly, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath. The artificial confidence that had sustained her cruel performance just moments ago was evaporating, leaving behind a terrified, exposed fraud. Harrison adjusted his hold on Leo and stepped fully into the ballroom. Two men in dark suits, his personal security detail fanned out seamlessly behind him, taking up positions near the doors with quiet, professional efficiency. Harrison did not look at them. He did not look at the alumni who were practically tripping over themselves to clear a path for him. He ignored the frantic, sycophantic smiles of former student body presidents and aspiring entrepreneurs who would have sold their souls for 5 minutes of his time. He parted the sea of staring faces with effortless grace. People shrank back, intimidated by the sheer gravity of his presence. He walked with the measured, deliberate pace of a man who never had to rush for anyone. His gray eyes swept over the crowd, dismissing them instantly until they found me. When his gaze locked onto mine, the cold, calculating CEO vanished entirely. His expression softened, warming into a look of absolute, unfiltered devotion that made my heart flutter exactly the way it had on the day we met. The icy armor he wore for the world melted away, reserved only for me and our son. Braden, still trapped in his own delusion, suddenly puffed out his chest. He smoothed down the lapels of his velvet tuxedo jacket, a pathetic gesture of preparation. In his narcissistic mind, he actually believed Harrison Caldwell had come to this event to find him. He believed the billionaire CEO was making a grand entrance to personally congratulate him on his groundbreaking startup. I watched Braden take a half step forward, plastering a desperate, eager smile on his face, ready to extend his hand and introduce himself to his savior. But Harrison did not even register Braden's existence. He walked straight past my ex-fiancé, passing so close that the fabric of his custom suit brushed against Braden's outstretched arm. Braden froze, his hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space between them, his eager smile shattering into a mask of complete humiliation. Harrison stopped directly in front of me. The surrounding circle of alumni, including Mark David and the woman Rachel had threatened earlier, stood completely paralyzed, watching the interaction with bated breath. Mommy Leo cheered, his face lighting up with a brilliant smile. He wiggled in Harrison's arms, reaching out for me with his small hands, the stuffed dinosaur nearly bopping me on the nose. I smiled, a genuine radiant smile that warmed my entire face. I reached out and took my son from Harrison, settling Leo comfortably onto my hip. I kissed his soft curly hair, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and sleep. "Hi, my sweet boy," I murmured, rubbing his back. "Did you behave for Daddy?" Harrison closed the final inch of space between us. He wrapped his large, warm hand around the back of my neck, his thumb gently caressing my jawline. He leaned down and kissed me. It was not a polite, socially acceptable peck for the benefit of an audience. It was a deep, passionate, possessive kiss that claimed me entirely and communicated exactly who I was to him. It was a kiss that clearly demonstrated a profound, unbreakable bond, a partnership forged in mutual respect and overwhelming love. In that single perfect moment, the last lingering ghost of the woman I used to be evaporated completely. I was no longer the victim of their cruel narrative. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was standing beside an equal partner who cherished me. The contrast between Braden's desperate need to belittle me, to feel powerful, and Harrison's effortless ability to elevate me, simply by being at my side, was a poetic vindication I savored down to my bones. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine for a brief second, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sorry we are late, darling," he said, his deep, resonant voice carrying effortlessly in the hushed silence of the ballroom. The traffic coming from the estate was absolutely brutal tonight. I told the driver to take the lake route, but even that was gridlocked. "I hope you have not been too bored waiting for us." I looked up at my husband, feeling a surge of profound gratitude and fierce power. "I have not been bored at all," I replied smoothly, keeping my voice light and conversational. "I was just catching up with some old acquaintances. They were telling me the most fascinating stories about their careers." Harrison finally turned his head, acknowledging the crowd of frozen alumni for the very first time. His gray eyes swept over the circle, landing on Braden and Rachel. The warmth in his expression vanished instantly, replaced by the chilling, calculating stare of the Axiom Holdings CEO. He looked at them not as equals, but as insignificant obstacles, minor annoyances that had momentarily delayed his evening. Braden's breath hitched audibly. I watched his Adam apple bob as he swallowed hard, his mind frantically trying to recalculate the odds of his survival. The $50 million buyout he had been dangling over my head like a weapon was entirely dependent on Axiom Holdings. He had spent the last 6 months aggressively courting Axiom acquisition team, drowning in debt, praying for a miracle. Now he realized that the miracle he needed was married to the woman he had just publicly humiliated. The horrific irony of his situation was paralyzing him. He was a rat trapped in a maze, and he had just insulted the person holding the only key to the exit. But Braden's terror was nothing compared to the absolute earth-shattering horror consuming Rachel. The terror radiating from Rachel was almost palpable. She stood paralyzed, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the man she had just claimed to report directly to. She had spent the last 20 minutes bragging to everyone in the room about her high-level executive position at Axiom Holdings. She had flaunted her fake vice president title, threatened to ruin careers using her imaginary security clearance, and boasted about her direct line to the executive board. And now the supreme boss of that very corporation, the absolute highest authority of Axiom Holdings, had just walked into the room, kissed the woman she despised, and called her darling. The realization hit Rachel with the force of a physical blow. Her entire fabricated identity, her carefully constructed narrative of wealth and power, was about to be obliterated by the one man on earth who could instantly prove she was a complete fraud. She knew there was no escape. She knew that the moment Harrison Caldwell spoke to her, her lies would be exposed to everyone she had ever cared about impressing. The heavy 5-carat diamond ring on her finger suddenly looked like a cheap, heavy shackle, dragging her down to the bottom of the ocean. She was standing face to face with the man who owned the very airspace she was claiming to rule. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her. She had built her entire sense of superiority on a foundation of lies, relying on the fact that no one in our old circle would ever have the access or the power to verify her claims. She had severely miscalculated. A violent tremor started in Rachel's hands and quickly spread through her entire body. She began to shake so badly that the gold sequins on her dress shimmered frantically under the chandelier lights. She tried to take a step back, desperately wanting to fade into the background, to disappear into the crowd before the execution could begin. But her body betrayed her. Her trembling fingers lost their grip. The crystal wine glass she had been clutching slipped from her hand. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling through the heavy, silent air of the ballroom. It struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, explosive crack. The glass shattered into 100 glittering shards, spraying expensive red wine across the immaculate floor, a perfect violent representation of her ruined facade. The sharp, explosive crack of the shattering crystal seemed to echo endlessly through the cavernous space of the grand ballroom. The dark red wine splashed across the pristine white marble, like a violent stain creeping toward the polished leather shoes of the surrounding alumni. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody signaled for a waiter. The entire circle of our former classmates remained absolutely paralyzed, staring at the glittering shards at Rachel's feet. The sudden noise had violently punctured the heavy tension, but it offered absolutely no relief. Instead, the atmosphere in the room grew exponentially more suffocating. Rachel stood frozen, staring down at the mess she had just made. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, causing the gold sequins on her dress to rise and fall in a frantic, erratic rhythm. The brilliant, confident woman who had just spent the last 20 minutes commanding the room and belittling my existence was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, exposed fraud desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. She looked up slowly, her wide, panicked eyes darting between my calm expression and Harrison's imposing figure. I watched the gears turning behind her eyes. I could see the exact moment her survival instinct kicked in, overriding her sheer terror. Rachel had always been a master manipulator. She had survived her entire life by twisting the truth, playing the victim, and utilizing her artificial charm to escape the consequences of her actions. In her delusional, desperate mind, she actually believed she could somehow charm her way out of this catastrophic situation. She genuinely thought she could employ her fake corporate persona to manipulate the billionaire CEO of Axiom Holdings standing right in front of her. Rachel forced her trembling shoulders to relax. She took a deep, jagged breath and manually smoothed her features. The terrified expression was instantly replaced by a bright, overly eager smile that looked incredibly painful to maintain. It was a manic, desperate grin that did not reach her eyes. She took a cautious step forward, carefully avoiding the broken glass and the spreading pool of red wine. She lifted her chin, attempting to project the authority of the high-level executive she had falsely claimed to be. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice pitching up an entire octave in her anxiety. "What a tremendous surprise to see you here tonight." She let out a high-pitched artificial laugh that sounded like scraping metal against stone. It grated against the ears of everyone standing nearby. "I am so sorry about the glass," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward the floor. "I was simply so startled to see you outside of the corporate tower. We were not expecting the executive board to make an appearance at a university alumni event." The surrounding crowd fell completely silent. Mark and David exchanged utterly bewildered looks. The other alumni watched Rachel with a mixture of intense fascination and profound secondhand embarrassment. They were watching a train wreck unfold in real time, and they could not look away. Rachel took another tentative step closer to Harrison, completely ignoring my presence, and the fact that our son was resting comfortably on my hip. She positioned herself directly in Harrison's line of sight, eager to establish her imaginary dominance in front of the crowd. "It is truly wonderful to see you," she gushed, her fake smile stretching wider. "I was just telling my former classmates all about the incredible work we are doing at the company. I was sharing our new initiatives for the public relations division and the global expansion strategies we discussed at the last quarterly review. It is an absolute honor to represent Axiom under your leadership, boss." She emphasized the final word, dropping it into the quiet ballroom like a heavy stone. "Boss." She said it with a sickening familiarity, attempting to project an image of professional intimacy and high-level corporate camaraderie. She wanted the crowd to believe she was part of his inner circle. She wanted Braden to see that she held the ultimate power. Harrison did not move a single muscle. He did not blink. He did not offer her a polite nod or a reciprocal smile. He stood perfectly still, holding Leo securely against his chest, his free hand resting comfortably on the small of my back. He looked down at Rachel with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. It was not anger. It was not irritation. It was a complete and total lack of recognition. He assessed her the way a person might assess a smudge of dirt on a window pane before deciding to look past it. The silence that followed Rachel's greeting was excruciating. It stretched on for 10 seconds, then 20. The high-pitched echo of her artificial laugh slowly died away, leaving nothing but the sound of the air conditioning humming in the background. Rachel's fake smile began to tremble at the corners. The muscles in her cheeks twitched as she struggled to maintain the facade under the crushing weight of his silent stare. Sir Rachel prompted, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. The desperation was bleeding through her polished tone. "It is Rachel, from the Executive Public Relations Division. We are acquiring Braden Company." Harrison tilted his head slightly, a microscopic movement that conveyed an ocean of cold authority. His piercing gray eyes locked onto her terrified face. The sheer intensity of his gaze seemed to pin her to the floor. When he finally spoke, his deep, resonant voice carried effortlessly across the silent circle of alumni. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry or vindictive. He stated a simple, objective, irrefutable fact. "I do not know who you are." Those 7 words struck the room with the force of a physical detonation. They were quiet, they were calm, but they were absolutely lethal. They sliced through Rachel's carefully constructed fantasy and shattered it completely. The collective gasp from the surrounding alumni was immediate and audible. A woman standing behind Braden covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. Mark let out a harsh sound of disbelief. The whispers erupted again, this time sharp and biting. The crowd instantly realized the magnitude of the lie they had just been fed. The brilliant vice president of Axiom Holdings, the woman who had just spent half an hour threatening to ruin careers and bragging about her unlimited corporate power, had just been completely disavowed by the CEO himself. Rachel's face turned a horrifying shade of gray. The bright red lipstick she wore now looked like a harsh, unnatural slash across a ghostly canvas. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but she could not form a single coherent word. The panic in her eyes was absolute. She looked frantically at Braden, begging him silently to intervene to save her from this public execution. But Braden was entirely paralyzed. He stood frozen a few feet away, staring at Harrison with an expression of mounting horror. The reality of his own situation was crashing down upon him. He had tied his entire future, his $50 million buyout, his reputation, and his impending salvation from bankruptcy to a woman who had just been exposed as a complete and total fraud. His eyes darted from Rachel to Harrison, and finally to me. The arrogance that had fueled his cruel mockery just minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, frantic stare of a man who realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Please," Rachel stammered, taking a shaky step backward. "There must be some mistake. I work in the downtown tower. I have a corner office. I manage the international campaigns. You must have seen my reports." Harrison's expression did not change. The cold indifference remained fixed on his features. Axiom Holdings employs over 40,000 people globally. He stated, his tone clinical and detached. "I do not concern myself with the delusions of individuals who attempt to leverage my company name for personal validation. If you were an executive in my corporate structure, I would know you. I do not. Therefore, you are nothing to me." He turned his attention away from her, dismissing her existence entirely. He looked down at me, his eyes softening instantly as he brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "Are we ready to move on from this, darling?" he asked softly, ignoring the gasping crowd and the shattered woman standing nearby. "Leo is getting a bit tired, and I would much rather spend the evening celebrating with you than entertaining strangers." The sheer dismissal was the final, fatal blow. Harrison had not just exposed her lie, he had rendered her completely insignificant. To the untouchable billionaire CEO, Rachel was not even worth the effort of an argument. She was simply a minor inconvenience that had already been forgotten. I smiled up at my husband, feeling a profound sense of peace and absolute power. The years of carrying the weight of their betrayal, the quiet nights spent rebuilding my life, the endless hours of hard work had all led to this singular perfect moment of vindication. I adjusted Leo on my hip, feeling his small warm arms wrapped securely around my neck. "Not quite yet," I replied, my voice projecting clearly into the quiet room. "There is just one more thing we need to clarify for our friends here." I turned my head and looked directly at the circle of alumni. Their faces were a mixture of awe-shock and intense curiosity. They had just watched the mighty power couple crumble into dust, and they were hanging on my every word, waiting for the final revelation. I took a deliberate step forward, moving slightly away from Harrison's side. I stood tall, my posture commanding the space left by Rachel's destroyed authority. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating for the two people who had tried to ruin me, but for me it was incredibly clear. I faced the silent crowd, ensuring I had the absolute attention of every single person who had stood by and watched Brayden and Rachel humiliate me earlier. I was preparing to strip away the very last shred of Rachel's dignity and reveal her true title to the world. I looked at the eager faces surrounding us. Mark, David, and the others were hanging on to my silence. They wanted the truth. Rachel was trembling so violently that the gold sequins on her dress sounded like a rattlesnake warning of a strike. I kept my voice perfectly modulated. "It is truly fascinating how easily people believe a lie if it is wrapped in enough expensive fabric and presented with enough unearned confidence," I began. "Just moments ago, Rachel regaled all of you with tales of her supreme corporate authority. She claimed to be a vice president of public relations at Axiom Holdings. She claimed to report directly to the executive board. She claimed to have a corner office in the downtown tower and security clearance that could ruin lives." I turned my gaze back to Rachel, whose eyes were wide with a terror so profound it was almost difficult to witness. "Almost. Let us clarify exactly what your position entails, Rachel. Because Axiom Holdings does not have a vice president of public relations operating out of the Chicago branch. Our global PR division is headquartered in London. Furthermore, Axiom does not hire executives who lack basic fundamental integrity. The truth is, you do not work for Axiom Holdings at all. You work for Vanguard Staffing Solutions, a third-party temporary agency that Axiom occasionally contracts for low-level administrative overflow." A loud murmur swept through the alumni circle. The illusion of the high-powered executive was instantly replaced by the reality of a temp worker. Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She simply let out a pathetic, raspy breath. You are a freelance social media coordinator on a short-term temporary contract, I continued, ensuring my voice reached the very back of the gathered crowd. You do not manage international campaigns. You schedule automated posts for our subsidiary regional accounts. You do not have a corner office in the downtown tower. You have a shared cubicle on the third floor of a leased annex building located 20 miles outside the city center. And as for your security clearance, you possess a standard blue badge which allows you access to the employee cafeteria and the communal restrooms. Nothing more. Rachel took a staggering step backward. Her high heel caught on a fragment of the wine glass she had dropped earlier, sending a sharp scraping sound across the marble floor. She shook her head frantically, trying to deny the facts raining down upon her. "Stop!" she gasped, her voice cracking. "Stop lying! I am a vice president. I earned that title. I am important." Her defense was incredibly weak, sounding like the desperate pleas of a child caught stealing candy. The alumni who had previously envied her were now looking at her with a mixture of scorn and intense embarrassment. They realized they had been completely duped by her performance tonight. I did not raise my voice, but I let a layer of absolute freezing authority slip into my tone. You earned nothing, Rachel. In fact, the only thing you have successfully accomplished during your brief 3-month tenure as a temporary contractor is drawing the attention of our internal audit department. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The crowd parted slightly, giving me the room I needed to deliver the final execution. Axiom Holdings conducts routine retroactive background checks on all contracted employees who request access to our internal servers, I explained. You submitted a request last week, claiming you needed access to proprietary marketing data. That request triggered an automatic audit of your employment file. Do you want to tell the room what our Human Resources Department discovered during that audit, or shall I? Rachel's face contorted in sheer agony. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly as if blocking out my face would somehow block out reality. Please, she whimpered, barely audible over the soft jazz music playing in the background. Do not do this, Camille. Please, I am begging you. I felt absolutely zero sympathy. She had shown me no mercy 5 years ago when she slept with my fiancé in my bed, and she had shown me no mercy 20 minutes ago when she tried to humiliate me in front of our entire graduating class. Mercy was a privilege she had aggressively forfeited. Since you are suddenly suffering from stage fright, I will fill in the blanks for everyone, I said. The background check revealed that your entire resume is a work of complete fiction. You are not a prodigy, Rachel. You are a serial fraudster. You are lying! Rachel shrieked, her eyes snapping open. The panic had finally given way to a feral, cornered hysteria. You made this all up to ruin me because you are jealous. You are just a bitter ex-friend trying to destroy my life because Braden chose me over you. I smiled, a cold, empty smile. I do not need to make anything up, Rachel. The documentation is entirely real. Your temporary contract with Vanguard Staffing Solutions was officially flagged for immediate termination yesterday afternoon. The paperwork has already been processed by our legal department. When you show up to your shared cubicle on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, you will not be given assignments. You will be met by building security. You will be handed your termination packet, and you will be escorted off the premises. Your access badge has already been deactivated. You are officially unemployed. Rachel's legs seemed to give out beneath her. She stumbled and caught herself on the edge of a high-top cocktail table, sending a tray of appetizers clattering to the floor. She was a complete imposter, stripped of every single accolade she had claimed to possess. The room stared at her in utter disbelief. She was entirely alone in a room full of people. I turned my attention away from the trembling, ruined woman clutching the cocktail table. I had finished dismantling Rachel. There was nothing left of her fake persona to destroy. I shifted my gaze to the man standing a few feet away. Braden had been watching the entire exchange with an expression of mounting horror. His mouth hung slightly open, and his eyes darted frantically between me, Harrison, and the shattered woman he had intended to marry. Braden's mind was visibly racing, attempting to calculate the devastating fallout of this revelation. He had paraded her around proudly, using her fabricated status to elevate his own fragile ego. Now he was staring at a severely compromised liability. Rachel was not a vice president. She was an unemployed fraudster who had just been publicly humiliated by the wife of the billionaire CEO he desperately needed to impress. Braden's survival instincts were incredibly sharp and utterly devoid of loyalty. I watched the exact second he made his decision. Instead, his face hardened into a mask of pure, cold self-preservation. He looked at Rachel with profound disgust, treating her like a piece of garbage he had accidentally stepped on. "You lied to me," Braden hissed, his voice laced with venom. He took a deliberate step away from her, physically distancing himself from her toxic radius. "You told me you were an executive. You told me you had the ear of the board. You are nothing but a pathetic temp worker." Without missing a beat, he immediately pivoted. He completely turned his back on the crying woman he had planned to marry. He smoothed the lapels of his velvet tuxedo jacket, took a deep, steadying breath, and pasted on an incredibly eager, desperate smile. Braden completely dismissed the brutal emotional carnage that had just unfolded right in front of him. His mind was singularly focused on one desperate objective. He had to save his company. He had to secure the $50 million buyout before his entire fraudulent startup collapsed into bankruptcy and federal indictment. "Mr. Caldwell," Braden said, taking a bold, confident step toward my husband, "I must apologize for the unfortunate scene my former associate just caused. She clearly suffers from severe delusions of grandeur. I assure you, her lack of integrity has absolutely no bearing on me or my professional ventures. I am a man who values absolute transparency and relentless innovation." Braden extended his right hand toward Harrison, a pleading, hungry gleam shining in his eyes. He was completely blind to the reality of the situation. "I have been attempting to reach your acquisition team for months," Braden continued, his voice breathless with greedy anticipation. "My tech startup has developed a proprietary algorithm that perfectly aligns with Axiom's strategic expansion goals. The data is phenomenal. We are poised to completely revolutionize the market. I know we can finalize this $50 million buyout and create a legacy together." Braden stood there, his hand hovering in the air, eagerly waiting for the billionaire CEO to validate his existence and save him from absolute ruin. He genuinely believed his arrogant pitch would miraculously work. Braden stood there, his hand extended in the empty space between them, the heavy silence of the grand ballroom pressed against his chest. He genuinely believed that his arrogant pitch would miraculously work. He thought the billionaire CEO would shake his hand, validate his desperate existence, and save his failing company with a massive influx of cash. Harrison did not move a single muscle to reciprocate the gesture. He simply looked down at Braden's extended hand with the mild, detached curiosity of a man observing a stain on a pristine carpet. The rejection was absolute and completely humiliating. Braden slowly lowered his arm, the velvet material of his jacket brushing against his side. The eager, desperate smile on his face began to tremble, but he refused to drop the facade. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly under the bright chandelier lights. "Mr. Caldwell." Braden tried again, pitching his voice louder to ensure the surrounding crowd could hear him. "I understand this is a social event, and perhaps not the ideal setting for a formal business pitch. But the synergy between my tech startup and Axiom Holdings is undeniable. We are changing the landscape of data analytics. My team has developed algorithms that your competitors are years away from understanding. We are standing on the precipice of a global market disruption. I know your acquisition team has been reviewing my proposals. If we could just schedule a brief 5-minute sit-down on Monday morning, I can personally guarantee you will see the immense value of this $50 million buyout." Harrison shifted his weight slightly, securing his hold on our sleeping son. He looked at Braden with an expression of profound, chilling boredom, the kind of look a lion gives a field mouse before walking past it. When Harrison finally spoke, his deep, resonant voice carried a quiet authority that instantly commanded the entire room. "I do not handle tech acquisitions, Braden." Harrison stated, his tone remarkably flat, and devoid of any professional interest. Axiom Holdings is a vast global entity. I oversee the macro-level strategic direction of the corporation. I do not micromanage the individual portfolios of our subsidiary divisions. Furthermore, I absolutely do not entertain desperate elevator pitches from strangers at my wife university reunions. Braden's face flushed a deep mottled red. The public dismissal was brutal. The alumni who had previously viewed him as a rising tech star were now watching him beg like a desperate salesman. But Braden was cornered. His company was drowning in debt, and this was his final chance at salvation. He took another step forward, entirely abandoning all sense of corporate decorum. "Please, you have to listen to me," Braden pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "My company is exactly what Axiom needs to dominate the predictive analytics sector. I just need you to look at the preliminary data. I just need you to authorize the acquisition team to finalize the paperwork." Harrison let out a soft, humorless breath. He looked down at Braden with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "You are fundamentally misunderstanding the corporate structure of my company," Harrison explained, his voice ringing crystal clear across the silent ballroom. "I do not authorize the tech acquisitions. I delegate those decisions entirely to the executive board, and more specifically to the silent majority shareholder who built our technology division from the ground up." Braden blinked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He had spent the last 6 months aggressively researching Axiom Holdings, trying to find a backdoor into their acquisition pipeline. He knew the names of the board members. He knew the corporate structure. But the identity of the silent majority shareholder was a closely guarded industry secret, a ghost entity that controlled billions of dollars in tech assets without ever stepping into the public eye. Harrison turned his head and looked at me. A warm, proud smile broke across his handsome features, completely transforming his face. He gently brushed his hand against my shoulder before turning his piercing gray gaze back to the terrified man standing in front of us. "My wife is the silent majority shareholder of Axiom Holdings," Harrison announced. His words struck the room with the force of a physical blow. "She handles all tech acquisitions. She reviews every single due diligence report. She holds the absolute final authority on every buyout our corporation executes." "You are talking to the wrong person, Braden." The silence in the grand ballroom became utterly paralyzing. The collective shock radiating from our former classmates was so intense, it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Mark and David stared at me with their mouths hanging open. The women who had just been pitying my plain black dress were now looking at me with overwhelming absolute awe. I was not just a successful woman, I was a corporate titan. I was the hidden billionaire architect behind one of the most powerful technology divisions on the planet. Braden's entire world collapsed in a fraction of a second. His knees physically buckled, and he had to lock his legs to keep from collapsing onto the marble floor. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. The realization crashed down upon him with devastating, brutal clarity. The man he had been begging for a bailout was useless to him. The entire financial future of his company, his $50 million lifeline, his reputation, and his freedom from federal indictment rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had betrayed, humiliated, and mocked just 20 minutes ago. 20. Braden stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. He looked at my understated dress. He looked at my calm, serene expression. The cognitive dissonance was shattering his mind. He had spent the entire evening trying to convince the room that I was a pathetic failure who had held him back. Now he was standing before the silent majority shareholder of Axiom Holdings, realizing that I held the power to destroy him with a single signature. Camille Braden stammered, his voice barely a whisper. His arrogant posture had completely vanished, replaced by the trembling, desperate stance of a defeated man. "I had no idea. I am so sorry about earlier. I was just stressed. The pressure of the buyout has been getting to me. Please, we can talk about this professionally. We used to be a team. We know how to work together." I smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made Braden physically recoil. I reached out and gently took Leo from Harrison's arms, handing my sleepy son over to my husband so I could have both hands free. I turned my full attention to the trembling man standing before me. "We were never a team, Braden," I said smoothly, my voice projecting across the silent circle of investors and alumni. "A team requires mutual respect and basic human decency. Two things you have severely lacked since the day I met you. But you are absolutely right about one thing. We are going to talk about this professionally." I reached down and unclasped the polished gold latch of my designer handbag. The crowd watched my every movement with breathless anticipation. I slipped my hand inside the smooth leather interior and pulled out a thick, heavy dossier bound in dark navy blue folders. Imprinted in bright silver foil across the front cover was the exact corporate logo of Braden Technology Startup. "Let us talk about your company financials, Braden," I said, tapping the heavy dossier against the palm of my hand. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout to command the absolute attention of every single person in that grand ballroom. I held the heavy navy blue dossier up so the overhead chandelier lights caught the silver foil of Braden Company logo. I saw Greg and Simon standing in the crowd just a few feet away. They were two of the most prominent angel investors in Chicago, and I knew for a fact they had poured millions of dollars in seed funding into Braden's startup. Their eyes were locked onto the folder in my hands, their expressions shifting from social curiosity to intense financial concern. Braden swallowed audibly. He took a small involuntary step backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. He knew exactly what was inside that folder. He knew the devastating secrets he had been desperately trying to hide from his investors and the authorities. When your aggressive acquisition proposals finally landed on my desk at Axiom Holdings, I was naturally curious. I began my tone clinical and detached, like a surgeon preparing to make the first incision. I recognized the company name immediately, of course. So I authorized a comprehensive forensic audit. I deployed my top team of corporate accountants to conduct a thorough due diligence review of your proprietary algorithms and your user metrics. I wanted to see this phenomenal $50 million empire you claim to have built. I opened the thick dossier, flipping past the title pages. The crisp sound of the heavy paper turning echoed in the quiet room. Greg and Simon stepped closer, pushing past Mark and David to get a better view. "You pitched this room on your brilliant disruptive technology." I continued scanning the first page of the financial summary. "You told these people you were on the precipice of a global market disruption. But the due diligence report tells a completely different story, Braden. It tells a story of systematic, desperate fraud." Braden's face twisted into a mask of pure panic. "Camille, stop!" he hissed, lunging forward to grab the folder from my hands. Harrison Personal Security Detail moved instantly, stepping smoothly between Braden and me, forcing my ex-fiancé to back away with his hands raised in surrender. I did not even blink at his pathetic attempt to silence me. I looked directly at Greg and Simon, the angel investors, who were now watching Braden with growing suspicion and anger. "In Q3 of last year, you reported a 300% growth in your active user base," I stated, reading the exact numbers from the forensic audit. "You used those specific metrics to secure your second round of venture capital funding. But our auditors discovered that those numbers were completely fabricated. Your actual active user base dropped by 40% during that period. You utilized offshore click farms to generate millions of fake accounts, inflating your engagement data to defraud your investors. Your proprietary algorithm does not predict market trends. It simply manipulates internal server traffic to simulate artificial growth." A collective gasp of outrage erupted from the crowd. Greg's face turned an angry shade of red. Simon crossed his arms, glaring at Braden with absolute fury. The brilliant tech CEO was being exposed as a common corporate scammer right in front of the people funding his lifestyle. "That is a lie!" Braden shouted, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to regain control of the narrative. "You are making this up. You cooked those documents because you are a bitter, jealous woman. You never got over me. You initiated this entire buyout review just so you could manufacture fake evidence and ruin my reputation in front of my peers. You are obsessed with destroying me because I chose Rachel over you." I let out a soft, cold laugh that completely dismissed his frantic gaslighting attempt. I flipped to the next section of the dossier, pulling out a stack of printed emails. "I did not seek you out, Braden," I replied, my voice dripping with absolute condescension. "I did not need to. You came crawling to my corporation begging for a lifeline. Here are the 37 separate emails you sent to the Axiom acquisition team over the last 6 months. In these emails, you explicitly state that your company will be insolvent by the end of the fiscal quarter if we do not expedite the buyout. You are not looking for a strategic partnership. You are begging for a bailout because your startup is exactly 3 weeks away from complete bankruptcy and a federal indictment for wire fraud." The alumni circle erupted into loud, shocked whispers. The facade of the wealthy, successful visionary was completely annihilated. Braden was standing before them, exposed as a desperate, broke criminal who had lied to everyone he knew. He looked around wildly, seeing the absolute contempt on the faces of his former friends and current investors. But I was not finished. I had one final lethal blow to deliver. I turned to the very last section of the dossier, the expense reports. I looked directly at Rachel, who was still trembling near the cocktail table, her ruined dress sparkling under the lights. The most fascinating part of the forensic audit was tracking where the actual investor funds disappeared to. I continued, my voice deadly calm. "You see, Greg and Simon, your seed money did not go toward research and development. It did not go toward server upgrades or hiring top-tier engineers. It went directly into Braden personal accounts to fund a completely fabricated influencer lifestyle." I read the exact financial transactions aloud, projecting my voice so every single person could hear the depth of their greed. Investor funds were illegally diverted to secure a lease on a new Mercedes-Benz. $200,000 of corporate capital was embezzled to pay for luxury vacations in Bora Bora and private chartered flights. And most interesting of all, $25,000 of misappropriated seed money was wired directly to a custom jeweler in New York last month. I paused, letting the silence stretch out for maximum impact. I looked down at Rachel, trembling left hand, at the massive diamond ring she had just spent the entire evening shoving in my face. "You stole from your own investors, Braden," I stated, delivering the final, irrefutable verdict. "You committed federal corporate fraud so you could buy a 5-carat diamond ring for the woman you cheated with. You built an entire empire of lies, and you funded it with stolen money." The revelation hung over the grand ballroom like a guillotine blade that had just been dropped. The absolute silence that followed my accusation lasted for perhaps 3 seconds before the entire room erupted. Greg and Simon, the two angel investors who had poured millions into Braden's startup, reacted with immediate, explosive fury. Greg's face turned an alarming shade of crimson as the reality of his stolen money sank in. Simon slammed his cocktail glass down onto a nearby high-top table so hard the stem snapped in two. The sharp clatter of breaking crystal joined the rising tide of angry voices. "You stole our seed capital!" Greg roared, stepping aggressively toward Braden. His voice cut through the ambient noise, carrying the heavy, dangerous weight of a man who realized he had been played for an absolute fool. "You took our money to buy cars and diamonds. You told us those funds were locked in research and development. I will sue you into oblivion, Braden. I will see you behind bars for this." Braden physically flinched, retreating from the furious investors. The smooth, confident tech visionary was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, cornered animal. He looked frantically at the surrounding circle of alumni, searching for a single sympathetic face. He found none. Mark and David, who had once idolized his apparent success, were staring at him with pure disgust. The women in the crowd were shaking their heads, whispering harshly about the stolen diamond ring resting on Rachel's trembling finger. The social execution was absolute. Braden had built his entire identity on the perception of wealth and brilliance. Now everyone in his orbit knew he was nothing more than a desperate criminal who funded his lifestyle through blatant embezzlement. The walls of the ballroom seemed to close in on him. He took another step back, bumping hard against a heavy oak pillar. There was nowhere left to run. When a narcissist is stripped of their false reality, they do not experience remorse or accountability. They experience pure, unadulterated rage. I watched the terror in Braden's eyes morph rapidly into a blinding, desperate fury. He could not accept that he was the architect of his own destruction. His fragile ego simply could not process the magnitude of his failure. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He went on the offensive. He decided to rewrite the narrative right there on the marble floor. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The veins in his neck bulged against his velvet collar. He glared at me with a hatred so profound it practically radiated from his pores. He refused to look at the angry investors or the judging alumni. He focused all his venom entirely on me. "This is a setup." Braden yelled, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his panic. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "Do not listen to a single word she says. This is a complete and total fabrication. She is a liar. She is a bitter, vindictive liar who fabricated this entire document to frame me." The audacity of his claim was almost breathtaking. Despite standing in front of the silent majority shareholder of the corporation that conducted the audit, he genuinely believed he could gaslight an entire room of highly educated professionals. I stood perfectly still, my posture relaxed and authoritative, allowing him to dig his own grave deeper with every word he shouted. "You are sick," Camille Braden continued, his voice echoing harshly across the ballroom. "You are completely mentally unstable. You never got over me. You have been obsessing over me for 5 years. You could not handle the fact that I walked out on you. You could not handle the fact that I chose a woman who is 10 times the partner you could ever be. You have been tracking my success, stalking my company, and waiting for an opportunity to strike." He took a step forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to reclaim his dominance. He turned slightly, trying to address the crowd, demanding they listen to his twisted version of reality. "Think about it," Braden urged the alumni, sweeping his arm in my direction. "Look at what she is doing. What kind of person initiates a multi-million-dollar corporate audit just to settle a personal grudge? A crazy person. A woman who is so desperately in love with her ex-fiancé that she will commit corporate espionage to ruin his life. She saw that my company was on the verge of greatness. She saw that Axiom Holdings was interested in my proprietary technology. So she used her husband influence to access my files and manipulate the data. She altered the user metrics in that report. She forged those expense accounts. I never stole a dime." The crowd remained deadly silent, observing his unhinged performance. No one was buying it, but Braden was too deep in his own delusion to stop. He was convinced that if he shouted loud enough and acted confident enough, the reality of his crimes would magically disappear. He truly believed he could manipulate the room into seeing me as the villain and himself as the tragic victim of a scorned woman. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his eyes wide and frantic as he continued to weave his absolute fiction. "You are pathetic, Camille," Braden sneered, spitting the words with absolute venom. "You orchestrated this entire scene tonight just to get my attention. You brought your billionaire husband here to show off because you are deeply insecure. You wanted to make me jealous. You wanted me to look at you and regret leaving you. But I do not. I look at you and I feel nothing but profound relief that I escaped your miserable, suffocating grip. I would rather be broke than spend another minute pretending to care about your boring, mediocre life." He let out a harsh, manic laugh that sounded completely disconnected from reality. "You went through all this trouble poring over my financials, hiring auditors, tracking my movements, all because you are still madly in love with me. It is actually sad. You have this massive empire, you have this powerful husband, and yet your entire existence still revolves around me. You cannot let me go. You are obsessed with me, Camille. You are trying to destroy my company because you know that my success proves I was right to leave you. You are trying to bankrupt me so I will come crawling back to you. But it will never happen. I will never want you. Rachel is my future, and you are just a sad, desperate ghost from my past." He crossed his arms, a smug, satisfied grin spreading across his sweating face. He actually thought he had won. He thought he had successfully flipped the script, painting himself as the brilliant visionary targeted by a crazy, jealous ex. He stood there basking in his own manufactured glory, waiting for the crowd to turn against me and rush to his defense. He expected Greg and Simon to apologize to him. He expected the alumni to shake their heads at my supposed instability. He lived in a fantasy world constructed entirely of his own delusions, and he expected reality to simply bend to his will. I listened to his entire unhinged monologue without interrupting a single time. I did not frown. I did not display a fraction of an inch of anger or hurt. I simply stood there bathed in the warm light of the crystal chandeliers, holding the devastating dossier in my hand. I looked at Harrison, who was holding Leo securely. My husband gave me a subtle, knowing smile, his gray eyes shining with absolute pride. He knew exactly what I was about to do. I turned my attention back to Braden. The silence in the room stretched out tight and fragile, like a wire pulled to its absolute breaking point. I looked at the smug, arrogant grin pasted on Braden's face. And then I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a loud, clear, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement. It was the sound of someone who had just heard the most ridiculous, hilarious joke in the world. The sound of my laughter shattered Braden's arrogant posture instantly. His smile dropped, replaced by a look of profound confusion. My laughter echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting through his delusions with ruthless efficiency. The sheer, genuine nature of my amusement stripped away the last remnants of his false authority. "You genuinely believe I spent the last 5 years thinking about you?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold, mocking amusement. "You actually believe I utilized the vast resources of a global corporate titan just to get the attention of a man who cannot even afford his own velvet jacket?" I shook my head slowly, leveling him with a stare of absolute freezing contempt. "Your arrogance is truly pathological, Braden. I did not seek you out. I did not track your pathetic little startup. I did not stalk you or orchestrate a targeted audit to settle a personal grudge." I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a stapled stack of printed emails. I held them up higher, adjusting my grip so the bright overhead lights illuminated the corporate letterhead. "I did not have to find you, Braden," I stated, holding the thick stack of papers up for the entire room to see. "Because you came crawling to me." I flipped to the first page of the printout, preparing to dismantle his final desperate illusion and prove to everyone exactly who had been begging whom for survival. I held the thick stack of printed emails high in the air. The crisp white sheets of paper caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Every single eye in the grand ballroom was fixed on the documents in my hand. Braden stood completely frozen. His previous outburst about my supposed obsession with him still echoed faintly in the cavernous room, but the words had already lost all their power. He stared at the corporate letterhead visible on the top sheet, and I watched the last remaining drops of blood drain from his face. He knew exactly what I was holding. He knew that his entire fabricated reality was about to be burned to the ground. I lowered the stack of papers and looked directly at the two angel investors, Greg and Simon. They were standing so close I could hear their heavy, angry breathing. I addressed them directly because they were the ones who had funded Braden and his delusional lifestyle. "I want you to listen very carefully to the timeline of these communications," I said, my voice projecting with calm, lethal authority. "Because while Braden was telling you that your investments were securing a global market disruption, he was simultaneously begging my corporation to save him from absolute ruin." I pulled the first email from the top of the stack. "This was sent exactly 6 months ago," I stated, reading the date aloud. It was directed to the Senior Acquisition Manager at Axiom Holdings. The subject line reads, "Urgent Strategic Partnership Opportunity." I cleared my throat slightly and began to read Braden and his exact words to the silent crowd. "To the Axiom Acquisition Team. I am the Chief Executive Officer of a revolutionary predictive analytics startup. We are currently experiencing unprecedented exponential growth and are seeking a premier corporate partner to facilitate our global expansion. I am offering Axiom the exclusive opportunity to acquire a minority stake in our firm before we take the company public." I paused and looked up. A few people in the crowd murmured. It sounded like a standard confident business pitch, but I was just getting started. I moved the first page to the back of the stack, revealing the next email. That was the confident visionary Braden, I said smoothly. But the visionary facade did not last very long when my acquisition team simply ignored his unsolicited proposal. Let us move forward to an email sent exactly 4 months ago. The tone begins to shift. I read the second email aloud. The subject line had changed to time-sensitive acquisition inquiry. Braden wrote, to the Axiom Executive Board. I have not received a response to my previous communications. We are currently adjusting our internal valuation, and I am willing to offer Axiom a majority controlling stake in my company at a highly discounted rate of $80 million. This offer is valid for exactly 1 week before we open negotiations with competing firms. Simon let out a sharp, humorless scoff. He turned to Greg, his face twisted in disbelief. 80 million, he muttered. He told us the company was valued at 200 million 4 months ago. He lied to us during the entire Series B funding round. I nodded at Simon, confirming his realization. He absolutely lied to you, Simon. But he could not lie to the internal tracking algorithms at Axiom Holdings. Our automated systems flagged his emails as spam because his company did not meet the minimum revenue threshold required for a corporate review. He was a small, insignificant fish, trying to swim in an ocean he did not belong in. And because we ignored him, his desperation began to escalate into outright panic. I pulled out the third email. This one was sent 2 months ago, I announced. The subject line is simply, request for immediate meeting. Listen to the brilliant tech tycoon beg for his life. I read the text slowly, emphasizing every pathetic word. Please direct this to the senior partner in charge of acquisitions. My company is facing an unexpected temporary liquidity issue. We have the technology, but we require an immediate capital injection to sustain our server infrastructure. I am willing to sell the entire company, all proprietary assets and algorithms, for $20 million. I will step down as CEO if required. Please respond. I am available to meet at any hour of the day or night. The alumni circle let out a collective gasp. The mighty Braden, the man who had just spent the entire evening boasting about a $50 million buyout, had been secretly offering to sell his entire company for less than half that amount just to escape his own sinking ship. He had been willing to surrender his title, his assets, and his dignity. The illusion of the power couple was completely dead. Rachel stood near the cocktail table looking like she might physically vomit. She had hitched her wagon to a man who was secretly begging to be bought out for pennies on the dollar. But I was not finished. I had saved the most devastating piece of evidence for last. I pulled the final email from the stack. The paper felt heavy in my hands, charged with the power to destroy the man who had tried to destroy me. I looked directly into Braden's terrified eyes. He was shaking. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a man standing on the gallows. This final email was sent exactly 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly serious register. It was flagged by our legal department and forwarded directly to my desk because it contained an admission of federal crimes. I want everyone in this room to hear exactly who Braden really is. I took a breath and read the final message. The subject line is blank. The email reads, I am pleading with you to look at my technology. My investors are demanding a financial audit, and I cannot provide the documentation. We have no active user growth. The funds are gone. If Axiom does not buy us out and absorb our liabilities within the next 30 days, my startup will be forced to declare bankruptcy. I am out of options. Please help me. I will sign whatever you want. Just assume the company debt before the federal regulators look at our books. I lowered the stack of papers. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and crushing. The air felt thick and heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. The magnitude of the revelation paralyzed the entire crowd. Braden was not a successful entrepreneur. He was not a tech genius. He was an insolvent, desperate criminal who had been begging my company to hide his crimes. I looked at Greg and Simon. The two angel investors were staring at Braden with a terrifying, lethal calmness. The shouting and the red-faced anger had passed. They had reached the point of cold calculating retribution. "You told them the funds were gone, Braden," I said, breaking the silence. "But you forgot to mention where they went. You forgot to mention the luxury cars, the private flights, and the 5-carat diamond ring. You forgot to mention that you spent their money maintaining an illusion of wealth because you were too incompetent to actually build it." Braden tried to speak. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling, but no words came out. His vocal cords seemed to have completely paralyzed under the weight of his undeniable guilt. He looked around the circle searching for an escape route, but the alumni had formed a solid, impenetrable wall around him. He was trapped. "You thought you could gaslight this room?" I continued, stepping closer to him. "You thought you could stand here and accuse me of being a jealous, obsessed ex-girlfriend. You thought you could scream loud enough to make everyone ignore the facts. But the facts are written right here in your own words. You admitted to insolvency. You admitted to defrauding your investors. You admitted that your company is entirely worthless." I turned my body slightly, addressing the wider audience to ensure everyone understood the final brutal truth. "When our legal department received this email 3 weeks ago, I did not orchestrate a fake audit out of spite. I did my job as the majority shareholder of Axiom Holdings. I ordered our forensic accountants to verify his claims of insolvency. And what they uncovered was so blatant, so aggressively illegal, that Axiom Holdings was legally obligated to report the findings to the authorities." I paused, letting the weight of my next words build. I looked directly into Braden's eyes, holding his terrified gaze. "I did not just reject your buyout proposal, Braden. I handed your entire financial portfolio over to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The internal audit did not just find fake users, it triggered a federal alert." Braden's knees physically buckled. He stumbled backward, catching himself on a chair to keep from hitting the floor. His breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps. "You are exactly 3 weeks away from complete bankruptcy," I stated, my voice ringing with finality. "But more importantly, you are exactly 3 weeks away from a federal indictment for wire fraud and embezzlement. You are not going to be a multimillionaire, Braden. You are going to federal prison." The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the force of a falling building. The velvet tuxedo jacket, the fake confidence, the arrogant insults, it was all gone. He was stripped bare in front of his peers, his investors, and the woman he had betrayed. He could not charm his way out of this. He could not gaslight the federal government. He had lost absolutely everything. His reputation, his company, his freedom, and his future were entirely obliterated. I stood there watching the realization wash over him. The sweet taste of absolute victory was intoxicating. 5 years ago, he had left me broken and humiliated in an empty apartment. He had laughed at my pain and stolen my future. Now I was the one standing tall, surrounded by a loving husband and a beautiful child, while he faced the total annihilation of his life. Braden's chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. His eyes darted wildly around the room. He looked at the furious investors waiting to tear him apart. He looked at the disgusted faces of our former classmates. He looked at me standing untouchable and serene. He realized with absolute chilling certainty that he was going to prison, and he was going to lose everything he had ever valued. He needed a way out. He needed someone to blame. He needed a scapegoat to absorb the wrath of the investors and the authorities. Slowly, his head snapped to the side. His eyes locked onto Rachel, who was still standing near the cocktail table, trembling in her ruined sequin dress. The terror in Braden's eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He stared at the woman he had destroyed his life for, and the final, most vicious betrayal began to form in his desperate mind. The terror in Braden's eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He stared at the woman he had destroyed his life for, and the final, most vicious betrayal began to form in his desperate mind. "It was her," Braden screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at Rachel. His voice cracked under the strain of his panic, but the accusation echoed fiercely across the grand ballroom. "She made me do it. I never wanted to touch those investor funds. I was trying to build a legitimate company, but she would not stop demanding more. She is a parasite." Rachel recoiled as if she had been physically struck. The terrified trembling that had consumed her body instantly transformed into rigid shock. Her jaw dropped open, and she stared at the man she had planned to marry with absolute disbelief. The surrounding alumni circle, already reeling from the exposure of the corporate fraud, now braced themselves for the ugly, spectacular implosion of the power couple. Braden took a step away from me and lunged toward Greg and Simon, desperate to redirect their lethal anger. "You have to believe me," Braden pleaded, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I was working day and night on the algorithm. I was trying to secure the next funding round legally. But Rachel was relentless. She threatened to leave me if I did not provide the lifestyle she felt she was owed. She demanded the luxury apartment. She demanded the chartered flights to Bora Bora so she could post photos online and pretend she was wealthy. She held our relationship hostage until I transferred the capital. She forced me to embezzle that money." The sheer cowardice of his defense was breathtaking. Faced with the absolute certainty of federal prison, Braden was entirely willing to throw the woman he supposedly loved under a moving train to save his own skin. He stripped away the last remaining shred of his dignity, choosing to portray himself as a weak, easily manipulated victim rather than accept accountability for his own fraudulent empire. "Do not look at me like that," Rachel shrieked, finding her voice at last. The pitch of her scream shattered whatever polished sophistication she had left. "You spineless, pathetic liar. Do not you dare try to pin your colossal failures on me." She marched toward Braden, her ruined designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She shoved him hard in the chest, ignoring the gasps of the onlookers. "You told me you were a tech genius," she yelled, jabbing her finger into his sternum. "You promised me you were building a unicorn startup. You told me those investors were practically throwing millions of dollars at your feet because your code was revolutionary. You lied to me from the very first day. You told me the company was generating massive revenue and that the cars and the vacations were completely paid for by corporate dividends." Braden shoved her hand away, his face twisted in a vicious sneer. "Because you demanded perfection," he spat back. "You wanted the Axiom Holdings fantasy. You created this entire fake identity as a vice president because you are deeply insecure and desperately hungry for status. You told me that if I did not buy you a 5-carat diamond ring, you would find a man who could. You are nothing but a gold digger who backed the wrong horse. I ruined my entire life trying to satisfy your endless greed. I committed wire fraud because you would not stop complaining about living in a standard apartment." The public brawl had descended into a grotesque, embarrassing spectacle. The alumni watched in horrified fascination as the two people who had entered the ballroom, radiating superiority, now tore each other to pieces in front of everyone they knew. Greg and Simon, the angel investors, looked at each other with profound disgust, realizing that their millions of dollars had been squandered by two deeply disturbed individuals playing a high-stakes game of pretend. "You ruined your own life because you are incompetent," Rachel screamed, her face flushed a blotchy, angry red. "You do not even know how to write a basic string of code without stealing it from open-source developers. Your proprietary algorithm is a complete joke. I had to create a fake resume and pretend to be an executive just to get us into the right networking events because you had absolutely zero social capital. You are a fraud, Braden. You are a broke, pathetic loser, and I am the only reason anyone even looked twice at your garbage company." Braden let out a roar of frustration and took a menacing step toward her. But Harrison Personal Security Detail immediately closed the distance, interposing themselves to prevent any physical violence. Braden stopped raising his hands again, sweating profusely as he glared at Rachel. "You are going to prison with me," Braden threatened, his voice dropping to a malicious register. "Do not think you are walking away from this clean. You signed the lease agreements on those cars. You put your name on the offshore accounts to hide the money. The federal investigators are going to seize everything you own. You are just as guilty as I am." The threat landed with devastating precision. Rachel's eyes widened as the sheer gravity of her legal exposure finally registered in her mind. The adrenaline that had fueled her aggressive counterattack completely vanished, leaving her utterly cold and terrified. She looked down at the massive diamond ring on her finger. A few minutes ago, it had been her proudest possession, a symbol of her triumph over me. Now she realized it was stolen property purchased with embezzled funds that the Securities and Exchange Commission would absolutely seize. She realized she was deeply implicated in a federal crime that carried severe prison sentences. She realized Braden had no money, no power, and no future. The sinking ship was fully submerged, and she was chained to the anchor. Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. She looked at Braden, realizing he was completely, entirely useless to her now. He could not protect her. He could not provide for her. He was a dead end. Her survival instincts, the same predatory instincts that had led her to sleep with my fiancé 5 years ago, kicked into overdrive. She needed a lifeline. She needed a shield. She needed someone with enough power and wealth to make this nightmare disappear. Slowly, she turned her head away from the ruined, sweating man she had planned to marry. She looked across the circle of disgusted faces and locked her eyes directly onto mine. The transformation was chilling to witness. The aggressive, shrieking woman vanished instantly. In her place emerged a fragile, terrified victim. Rachel forced her shoulders to slump. She let her lower lip tremble perfectly. She allowed heavy, wet tears to well up in her eyes and spill over her meticulously applied makeup. It was a masterclass in theatrical manipulation, and she deployed it with absolute desperate precision. "Camille." Rachel whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. She took a slow, tentative step toward me, her hands clasped together in a posture of pleading submission. "Camille, please. You have to believe me. I did not know. I swear to you, I had no idea he was stealing money." I stood my ground, leaning slightly against Harrison's side. I looked down at her fake tears with a complete lack of empathy. I did not say a word, allowing her to dig her own grave even deeper. "We used to be best friends," Rachel sobbed, taking another step forward. "We shared a dorm room in college. We dreamed about the future together. You know who I really am, Camille. You know I would never intentionally participate in something illegal. Braden brainwashed me. He controlled every aspect of my life. He lied to me about his finances, and he forced me to maintain this horrible fake image to help his company. I was trapped. I was so scared of him." The sheer audacity of her performance was staggering. She was attempting to use the very friendship she had brutally murdered as a shield against federal indictment. She was weaponizing our shared history, trying to elicit my sympathy by painting herself as a helpless victim of narcissistic abuse. "Please, Camille," Rachel begged, dropping to her knees on the marble floor right in front of me, ignoring the shards of the broken wine glass scattered nearby. "You have so much power now. You and your husband have the resources to fix this. You can tell the investigators that I was manipulated. You can protect me from him. I am so sorry for everything that happened in the past. I was young and stupid, and he poisoned my mind against you. But I am begging you, as the sister I always wanted you to be, do not let them send me to prison for his crimes. Please save me." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, playing the role of the desperate, repentant friend to absolute perfection. The alumni watched in stunned silence, waiting to see if the powerful billionaire wife would show mercy to the woman groveling at her feet. I looked down at Rachel. I studied her trembling shoulders and her tear-stained cheeks. I remembered the nights I had spent crying on an air mattress, wondering why I was not enough, wondering what I had done to deserve being betrayed by the two people I loved most. I remembered the profound agony of losing my entire support system in a single night, and as I looked at her now, I felt nothing but cold, absolute triumph. "You always were an incredible actress, Rachel," I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any warmth. "For a second there, you almost sounded convincing. I am sure a jury will find your performance highly entertaining." Rachel's fake sobs faltered. She looked up at me, her tearful expression slipping to reveal a flash of genuine panic. "Camille." "I am telling the truth," she insisted desperately. "He manipulated both of us. We are both victims of his lies." "We are not both victims," I corrected her sharply. "I was a victim. You were an active, willing participant. And I have zero intention of protecting you from the consequences of your own greed." I turned slightly toward the string quartet, who had remained frozen in the corner of the ballroom. Their audio equipment, including a wireless microphone used for event announcements, rested on a stand nearby. I gestured to one of Harrison's security guards. The man moved with silent efficiency, retrieving the microphone and handing it to me. I powered it on the soft electronic hum, signaling that the device was active and connected to the ballroom primary sound system. "You claim Braden manipulated you into this lifestyle," I said, speaking directly into the microphone. My voice echoed across the massive room, reaching every single guest, every investor, and every former classmate. "You claim you were a helpless prisoner forced into deceit, and that you never intended to hurt anyone. You are currently begging for my mercy by invoking the memory of our friendship. You want everyone here to believe that your betrayal 5 years ago was simply a youthful mistake, driven by Braden's toxic influence." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I held it up for the room to see. But the concept of premeditation is a very stubborn thing to overcome, Rachel. It leaves a digital footprint. When I discovered my wedding fund had been completely drained 5 years ago, I did not just cry and walk away. I hired a specialized data recovery firm to sweep my home network and my personal devices to figure out exactly how my security had been breached. Rachel's face turned a horrifying translucent shade of white. She remained on her knees, her hands gripping the fabric of her ruined dress, unable to move or speak. Braden stood frozen near the oak pillar, his eyes wide with impending doom. They managed to recover a deleted voicemail from the cloud backup attached to my home landline. I explained, my voice echoing loudly through the speakers. A voicemail that was accidentally recorded when a certain someone failed to properly disconnect a call while standing in my kitchen just 3 days before my wedding. I synced my phone to the ballroom Bluetooth audio receiver, overriding the background music completely. I tapped the screen, opening the encrypted audio file I had saved for exactly this moment. "I want everyone to hear the helpless, manipulated victim plotting her survival," I announced. I hit play. The audio crackled slightly over the massive speakers before coming into sharp, crystal-clear focus. The entire grand ballroom held its breath. "Braden, just initiate the transfer now." Rachel's voice echoed through the room. It was not the desperate, pleading tone she had just used. It was sharp, cold, and incredibly calculating. The alumni gasped, recognizing her voice instantly. "I am doing it," Braden's voice replied, sounding nervous but compliant over the recording. "Are you sure she will not see the notification?" "Her phone is charging in the kitchen," Rachel's voice snapped back, filled with dripping contempt. I turned off the push alerts. "Just take the 40,000 and let us go. We need that capital if your prototype is going to survive the next quarter." I cannot spend one more second pretending to be her maid of honor. She is so utterly clueless. She actually thinks we are spending the weekend doing wedding prep. "Just drain the account, Braden. We will be on a flight to Miami before she even realizes she is broke." The recording clicked and went dead. The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated, premeditated financial execution orchestrated entirely by the woman currently kneeling on the floor playing the victim. The revulsion in the room was palpable. Mark let out a sound of pure disgust, turning his back on Rachel completely. The women who had gathered around our circle looked at her with genuine horror. She had not just stolen a fiancé. She had actively, maliciously planned to bankrupt her best friend and laughed about it while doing it. The complete social annihilation was finalized. There was no coming back from this. Rachel collapsed forward, putting her hands over her face, sobbing hysterically. But this time the tears were real. She was weeping for the total destruction of her own life. Braden looked violently ill, swaying on his feet as the full weight of their exposed conspiracy crushed him. "Excuse me," a sharp, authoritative voice called out from the edge of the crowd. Two men wearing the uniform of the hotel event management team pushed through the circle of alumni, looking incredibly stern. "We have received multiple complaints regarding the disruption. I must ask both of you to vacate the premises immediately. You are no longer welcome at this gala." The organizers moved to physically escort the disgraced weeping couple toward the exit doors. The crowd parted willingly, eager to be rid of the toxic presence. Rachel struggled to her feet. humiliated, completely broken, preparing to make the agonizing walk of shame out of the ballroom. Hold on a moment. Harrison's deep, commanding voice cut through the noise, stopping the event organizers in their tracks. He shifted Leo, who was now sleeping peacefully, against his shoulder and raised his free hand. His gray eyes were locked onto Braden and Rachel, gleaming with absolute freezing authority. Security let them stay for exactly 1 more minute. Harrison instructed, his tone, leaving absolutely zero room for argument. I would hate for them to miss their transportation. The authorities are currently waiting for them in the lobby. The word transportation hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Before Braden or Rachel could even process the implication of Harrison Caldwell speaking directly to them, the grand double doors of the ballroom swung open for the third and final time tonight. The event organizers stepped aside immediately, their authoritative posture dissolving into nervous compliance. Striding into the room with absolute synchronized precision were 4 individuals wearing dark windbreakers, bearing the bright yellow block letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were accompanied by 2 uniformed Chicago police officers. The white-collar fraud division had arrived, and they were not here to mingle. The lead investigator, a tall woman with a severe expression and a clipboard, scanned the silent crowd. Her eyes quickly locked onto the sweating, trembling man standing near the oak pillar. Braden Vance, she announced, her voice projecting with absolute legal authority. The use of his full name sounded like a death sentence. The investigator signaled to the officers, and they moved forward, closing the distance in seconds. Braden did not try to run. He did not try to fight. The remaining fight had been completely drained from his body the moment the audio recording played. He stood completely paralyzed, watching his entire future evaporate. You are being detained for questioning regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and violation of federal securities regulations, the investigator stated, reading formally from a prepared document. She gestured to the officers, who swiftly moved to flank Braden. Please place your hands behind your back. We will be escorting you to the federal field office. The sound of the metal handcuffs clicking around Braden's wrists was surprisingly loud in the hushed ballroom. It was a sharp metallic snap that signaled the absolute end of his empire. Greg and Simon, the angel investors who had been defrauded out of millions, watched the arrest with grim satisfaction. They stepped forward, ensuring they were directly in Braden's line of sight as the officers secured his wrists. You are going to rot in a federal cell, Braden. Greg said, his voice low and devoid of any mercy. We will ensure the prosecution has every single financial record they need. You stole from the wrong people. Braden's face was the color of dirty snow. His knees sagged, and the 2 police officers had to physically support him by the elbows to keep him upright. As they turned him around to begin the long, humiliating walk out of the ballroom, Braden locked eyes with me one last time. He looked entirely broken. The arrogant tech visionary was gone. The cruel ex-fiancé who had mocked my dress just an hour ago had vanished. He was nothing but a frightened, pathetic criminal. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg for mercy, but no sound came out. I did not blink. I did not offer him a single ounce of sympathy. I simply watched him being dragged away, the velvet tuxedo jacket bunching awkwardly around his shoulders as the authorities escorted him out of the building. The heavy wooden doors closed behind him, severing his connection to our world forever. With Braden gone, the intense, suffocating tension in the room instantly fractured. The focus of the crowd immediately shifted to the only remaining target. Rachel was still kneeling on the marble floor, her ruined gold sequin dress pooling around her like a discarded costume. The realization that Braden had been arrested by federal agents finally penetrated her panic. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her expensive handbag, desperately attempting to salvage whatever tiny fraction of dignity she had left. She looked around the circle of alumni, searching for a single friendly face. She found absolutely nothing but cold, hard rejection. The very people who had been praising her fake corporate title a mere 30 minutes ago now looked at her with pure disgust. Mark turned his back to her completely. David stepped aside, creating a wide physical berth, as if being too close to her might contaminate his own reputation. The women she had tried to impress stared at her with open hostility, their eyes fixed firmly on the stolen 5-carat diamond ring she still foolishly wore on her left hand. Rachel realized she was entirely isolated. She had burned every bridge, betrayed her best friend, and aligned herself with a federal criminal. There was no one left to manipulate. The grand ballroom, which had once been the stage for her ultimate triumph, had transformed into a hostile, suffocating prison. She needed to escape. She needed to run away and hide before the federal investigators returned for her. She straightened her posture, wiping the smeared mascara from under her eyes with a trembling hand. She lifted her chin, trying to project an air of injured pride, but she just looked ridiculous. "Excuse me," Rachel muttered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "I am leaving." She stepped forward, expecting the crowd to part for her out of polite respect. Instead, the alumni actively recoiled, taking exaggerated steps backward to avoid any physical contact with her. It was the ultimate social exile. She was a pariah. She walked through the impromptu corridor of glaring faces, her high heels clicking unevenly against the marble floor. Her pace quickened with every step, transitioning from a dignified exit into a frantic, terrified retreat. I watched her go, leaning comfortably against Harrison's side. My husband shifted his weight, resting his free hand gently on my waist, while Leo continued to sleep peacefully against his shoulder. We did not need to say a word. The natural consequences of Rachel's own treacherous actions were handling the execution perfectly. Rachel practically ran out of the ballroom, pushing through the heavy double doors and rushing into the grand lobby of the Palmer House Hilton. The lobby was expansive and opulent, filled with plush seating areas and glittering chandeliers. She hurried toward the coat check counter, desperate to retrieve her expensive cashmere coat and escape the building before anyone else recognized her. The attendant, a young man in a neat uniform, smiled politely and took her ticket stub. "That will be $5 for the valet and coat retrieval, miss," the attendant said cheerfully, retrieving her heavy coat from the back room. Rachel fumbled with her designer handbag, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely open the clasp. She pulled out a sleek black credit card connected to the very same accounts Braden had been using to fund their lavish lifestyle. She handed the card to the attendant, refusing to make eye contact. The young man swiped the card through the machine. The terminal beeped a sharp negative sound. He frowned and tried it again. Another sharp beep echoed across the quiet counter. "I am sorry, miss," the attendant said, looking genuinely confused. "The card has been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Rachel's face flushed a deep, angry red. She was running on pure adrenaline and terror, and this minor inconvenience was pushing her to the brink of a total mental collapse. "Run it again!" She snapped, her voice shrill and demanding. "There are hundreds of thousands of dollars in that account. Your machine is clearly broken. Run it again right now." The attendant sighed, maintaining his professional composure. He swiped the card a third time. The screen flashed bright red with a specific error code. "Miss, the machine is not broken," he explained calmly, turning the terminal slightly so she could see the screen. "The bank has placed a hard freeze on this account. It says, please contact your financial institution regarding a federal hold." The words federal hold hit Rachel like a physical strike. The reality of Braden's threat from earlier finally crystallized in her mind. The investigators had not just come for Braden. They had already frozen every single asset tied to his fraudulent company, including the accounts she used to finance her entire existence. She had absolutely nothing. The gold sequin dress, the designer handbag, the stolen diamond ring, it was all she had left in the world, and the authorities would be coming to seize those items soon enough. Rachel frantically dug through her purse, searching for a single dollar bill. She came up completely empty. She had relied entirely on Braden's stolen corporate funds, refusing to carry cash like a commoner. She looked up at the attendant, panic bleeding from her eyes. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I need my coat. It is freezing outside. I will come back and pay you tomorrow. I promise. Just give me my coat." "I am sorry, miss," the attendant replied, strictly adhering to hotel policy. "I cannot release the items without proper payment. Those are the rules." Rachel stared at the warm cashmere coat hanging tantalizingly out of reach behind the counter. She had no money. She had no credit. She had no friends left to call for help. She was completely, utterly trapped. She snatched her declined credit card from the counter and turned away, tears of absolute despair finally spilling over her eyelashes. She stumbled toward the revolving glass doors at the front entrance of the hotel, leaving her warm coat behind. She pushed through the heavy glass, emerging onto the dark, busy streets of downtown Chicago. The moment she stepped outside, the brutal reality of her situation physically assaulted her. A violent gust of freezing wind swept off Lake Michigan, slicing straight through the thin material of her sleeveless sequin dress. The temperature had dropped drastically since the afternoon, and the biting cold was agonizing. Rachel wrapped her bare arms around her shivering shoulders, her teeth chattering uncontrollably as the icy wind whipped her hair across her face. She looked down at her feet. She was wearing a pair of strappy designer stilettos, entirely unsuited for walking in the freezing city. The heel on her right shoe had been damaged when she tripped earlier inside the ballroom, making her gait painfully uneven. She had no money for a taxi. Her rideshare applications were tied to the frozen bank accounts. Her only option was to walk the 6 blocks to the nearest public transit station and hope she could somehow beg her way onto a subway train. Rachel began her agonizing march down the unforgiving concrete sidewalk. The wind howled, tearing at her thin dress, punishing her for every lie she had ever told. She hobbled forward, favoring her broken heel, tears freezing on her cheeks as she passed glowing storefronts and warm restaurants. Pedestrians in heavy winter coats hurried past, avoiding eye contact with the shivering, weeping woman in the ruined gold dress. She was entirely alone, marching into a cold, desolate future with absolutely nothing left to her name. Inside the luxurious, heated grand ballroom, the contrast was absolute. I stood comfortably in the center of the room, bathed in the warm golden light of the crystal chandeliers. The string quartet had resumed playing a soft celebratory melody that drifted pleasantly through the air. The surrounding alumni were looking at me with profound respect, treating me not as the discarded victim, but as the triumphant, undisputed architect of my own incredibly successful life. Harrison pulled me gently against his side, pressing a warm, loving kiss to my temple while our son slept safely in his arms. I looked toward the grand double doors, knowing Rachel was out there walking into the freezing darkness, and I felt a profound, perfect sense of absolute peace. 3 weeks had passed since the explosive confrontation at the university alumni gala. The crisp Chicago autumn had officially surrendered to the early biting winds of winter. But inside our sprawling penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the atmosphere was completely serene. The morning sun streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting wide, warm pools of golden light across the polished hardwood floors. I stood by the expansive marble kitchen island, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The contrast between this quiet domestic peace and the chaotic, destructive night at the Palmer House Hilton was profound. I watched the steam rise from my mug, feeling an absolute sense of contentment settling deep into my bones. There was no anxiety. There was no looming threat of betrayal. There was only the solid, secure reality of the beautiful life I had built from the ground up. From the sunken living room, the sound of soft, joyful laughter drifted toward the kitchen. I turned to see Harrison sitting on the plush, cream-colored rug, a stack of colorful wooden building blocks scattered all around him. Leo was perched happily on his lap, attempting to construct a towering castle that completely defied the laws of physics. Harrison's large hands gently guided our son, stabilizing the precarious structure before it could topple over onto the floor. He wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark denim jeans, a sharp, relaxing departure from the intimidating bespoke suits he wore to the corporate tower. But to me, he had never looked more powerful or more handsome. This was the man who had walked into a room full of my past tormentors and effortlessly dismantled their entire reality without even raising his voice. He looked up, catching my gaze across the open concept room. His striking gray eyes crinkled at the corners, and he offered me that secret devoted smile reserved entirely for his family. I walked over to the adjacent dining table where a neat stack of corporate documents rested beside Harrison's open laptop. The final fallout from the gala had been swift and absolutely brutal. Harrison stood up, leaving Leo happily engaged with his collapsing block tower, and walked into the kitchen to pour himself a fresh cup of coffee. He came to stand right beside me, wrapping one strong arm around my waist and pressing a soft, warm kiss to my temple. I heard from the legal team this morning, Harrison said, his voice a low, comforting rumble that vibrated against my shoulder. The federal prosecutors officially unsealed the indictment against Braden yesterday afternoon. They are absolutely not offering a plea deal. Given the sheer volume of digital evidence and the aggressive hostile testimony from Greg and Simon, the prosecution is pushing for a maximum sentence. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and violating federal securities regulations are incredibly serious charges. He is looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the heavy information wash over me. 15 years. He had traded a secure, happy future for a velvet tuxedo jacket and a fake empire built entirely on stolen funds. And his company, I asked, my tone reflecting nothing but mild, casual business curiosity. It is completely liquidated, Harrison confirmed, taking a sip from his own mug. The angel investors filed a joint civil suit the very next morning, freezing whatever pitiful assets remained in his corporate accounts. His luxury cars were immediately repossessed by the leasing agencies. The bank seized his downtown apartment and all his personal assets. He currently has a public defender representing him because he literally cannot afford private legal counsel. The $50 million buyout he was so desperately relying on was officially dead on arrival. Axiom Holdings completely severed all ties, and our legal department ensured that every other major tech firm in the country knew exactly why we walked away from the negotiation table. Braden is entirely blacklisted from the industry. He will never work in technology or finance ever again. And Rachel, I asked, saying her name without a single trace of the bitter, agonizing pain it used to evoke. The woman who had sworn she was a top-tier executive had experienced an equally spectacular downfall, and I wanted to know the final outcome of her arrogant delusions. Harrison let out a brief, humorless laugh, shaking his head at the sheer audacity of her previous lies. Vanguard Staffing Solutions terminated her temporary contract the Monday morning after the gala, just as you promised she would be. But the professional destruction did not stop there. When the news of Braden's federal indictment hit the local business circuits, her association with him became a massive, toxic corporate liability. The public relations industry is incredibly small and fiercely protective of its reputation. The exact moment agencies realized she had actively participated in a scheme to defraud investors while simultaneously faking a vice president title at Axiom Holdings, she became completely radioactive to recruiters. No corporate entity in the city will even accept her resume for an entry-level position. Harrison leaned against the marble counter, crossing his ankles as he continued the briefing. Our security team ran a routine follow-up to ensure she was not attempting any retaliatory measures against our estate or our personnel. They reported that she was forced to vacate her luxury downtown apartment after her credit cards were repeatedly declined and her bank accounts were seized by the federal investigators seeking restitution for the defrauded investors. She is currently renting a tiny unfurnished room in a shared apartment in the outer industrial suburbs. And since she cannot find any white-collar office work, she took a job as a floor associate at a discount retail clothing store. She spends her days folding clearance sweaters and ringing up customers for minimum wage. The 5-carat diamond ring was indeed confiscated by the authorities as stolen property. She has absolutely nothing left of the glamorous fantasy she destroyed your wedding to achieve. I looked out the massive windows at the sprawling, brilliant city skyline below us. 5 years ago, the thought of Braden and Rachel's suffering would have brought me a frantic, desperate sense of vindication. I had spent so many nights crying on a cheap air mattress, wondering why I was not enough for them. I had tortured myself with the false belief that they were out there living a perfect, successful life, while I was struggling to rebuild my shattered existence from absolute scratch. They had taken my savings, my trust, and my entire vision of the future in one single night of breathtaking cruelty. But standing here now in the magnificent penthouse I purchased with my own heavily earned capital, held by a billionaire husband who respected my brilliance and adored my soul, I realized something incredibly profound. The true revenge was not the public takedown at the alumni gala. The true revenge was not seeing Braden face a federal judge in handcuffs or watching Rachel walk through the freezing wind in ruined designer heels. The ultimate revenge was the sheer, undeniable fact that their betrayal had been the greatest blessing of my entire life. If Rachel had not slept with Braden in my bed that night, I would have married a narcissistic fraud. I would have tied my financial and emotional future to a man who viewed me as a boring safety net and a financial stepping stone. I would have spent my entire life shrinking myself down to fit into his mediocre vision of success, always wondering why my efforts were never appreciated. Their cruelty had forced me to stand up. It had forced me to fight for my own survival. It had pushed me to enter the venture capital sector, to trust my own unparalleled instincts, and to build an empire that eventually led me straight into the arms of Harrison Caldwell. They did not steal my future. They accidentally handed me the keys to a glorious kingdom they could never possibly comprehend. I had evolved into a corporate titan, a loving mother, and a cherished wife. They had remained exactly who they always were. Selfish, greedy cowards who ultimately destroyed each other the moment the pressure applied to their fragile lives became too great to bear. I set my coffee mug down on the cool marble counter and stepped out of Harrison's embrace. I walked over to the dining table where the neat stack of corporate documents rested in the morning sunlight. At the very top of the pile was a single sheet of heavy premium paper bearing the official embossed crest of Axiom Holdings. It was the formal acquisition rejection notice drafted by our legal department regarding Braden liquidated tech startup. The document outlined in clear, sterile legal terminology that Axiom Holdings found the company to be entirely devoid of value, utterly lacking in proprietary innovation, and fundamentally compromised by criminal fraud. It was the absolute final nail in the coffin of Braden arrogant delusions. I picked up the heavy sheet of paper, feeling the crisp, expensive texture between my fingers. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity or sadness or even lingering resentment. I felt the clean, sweeping relief of closing a toxic chapter forever. I carried the formal document across the room to the sleek, stainless steel paper shredder sitting discreetly beside the home office desk. I placed the edge of the rejection notice into the feeding slot. The automatic sensor triggered instantly, grabbing the paper and pulling it downward with a sharp, satisfying mechanical whir. I stood there and smiled, listening to the machine run as the document was sliced into 1,000 tiny, meaningless ribbons. The trash finally took itself out. The most profound lesson I took away from that night wasn't about the mechanics of corporate acquisitions or the satisfaction of public vindication. It was a fundamental lesson about the true nature of betrayal, resilience, and personal power. When the people we trust most tear our lives apart, it feels like an absolute, inescapable ending. But as I learned, a devastating betrayal is often just the universe violently removing toxic anchors from your life. If my ex-fiancé and former best friend hadn't shattered my world 5 years ago, I would have spent the rest of my life shrinking my ambitions to fit into their shallow, mediocre reality. I would have never discovered my own resilience, built my company, or found a partner who truly respects my brilliance. The ultimate revenge you can ever achieve isn't found in actively plotting the downfall of your enemies. Desperate, greedy people will inevitably destroy themselves under the weight of their own lies. Your only job is to survive the initial heartbreak, channel that pain into relentless self-improvement, and build an authentic life that you are fiercely proud of. True victory is standing in the light of your own success and realizing that the opinions of those who hurt you no longer matter. Living well isn't just the best revenge, it is total and absolute liberation. Have you ever had a painful betrayal turn out to be the greatest blessing in disguise? I want to hear how you rebuilt your life on your own terms. Share your stories of rising from the ashes in the comments below. And if this journey of surviving, thriving, and taking back your power resonated with you, please hit that like and subscribe button. Remember, the trash will eventually take itself out. Your job is simply to keep building your empire.